Hello all, and welcome to tonight's second session. My name is Annie Hudson, and I am the program manager of MIT's Mobility Initiative, and it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Professor Jinhua Zhao. He is the director of MIT's New Mobility Initiative, which he'll be speaking about shortly. He is also an associate professor of city and transportation planning at MIT, where he brings behavioral science and transportation technology together to better design mobility systems and to help reform urban policies. In his words, he sees transportation as a language that describes a person, that characterizes a city, or that helps us better understand institutions. Professor Zhao is also the director of MIT's Urban Mobility Lab, which lies at the intersection of behavioral science and transportation, as well as the director of MIT's Transit Lab, which is a unique group that was formed in 1980 that supports research across academia and public transit agencies in order to support public transit agencies. Professor Zhao is also widely published and regarded as one of the world's foremost transportation experts. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Jinhua.
Thank you very much, Annie. So it's my great pleasure to present the MIT Mobility Initiative to you today. Throughout human history, we have invented fantastic technologies that help us move from A to B. But have those technology translated into the betterment of the mobility system as a whole is still an open question. Many of you may have been to Beijing these days, but few of you may have been to the city 30 years ago. This is a picture in 1982. Between the 30 years, technology clearly improved, but is today's mobility system the ideal one that really we are aspiring to? There's something called transport paradox, which says when one's income improves, most aspects of life improves, like clothing, housing, food, health, education, but transportation, not necessarily, particularly in certain stages of development. Here today, we have these new mobility technologies like electrification, shared mobility, automation, but will this new mobility technology fall into the same transport paradox? And more fundamentally, what is transportation? If you're a transportation professional previously, the answer is simple. Your job is to solve traffic congestion. But today, actually, we have a more richer set of objectives that are being attached with transportation. We see transportation as a sustainability problem, given it's one of the largest emitters, as a social justice problem, as a personal identity problem, as supporting urban vibrancy, and also have a significant public health implication. So why mobility initiative? I want to give you three aspects. From the industry point of view, the mobility industry is not stable. Both the incumbent and also the high-tech company are entering this mobility realm and generate a lot of confusion and chaoses, right? A few years ago, there's some sense of arrogance. Certain company will come in believing that one company and one technology will solve all the transportation problems, right? And only these days, I think people start to have some degree of humility, recognize that transportation is not a winner-take-all market. It's different from social media or search engine, etc. From the community perspective, the cities and the communities are often confused about these new mobility technologies or business models like scooters, e-bikes, Amazon drop boxes, TNC try to pick up passengers. There's quite a bit of new shocks to this community and the cities that we lack the expertise to really effectively respond. And from the ecosystem point of view, transportation is officially the largest CO2 emitter in the United States. So the pressure is daunting. So why MIT? We categorize the scholarship on transportation into three categories: technology, data, and value. Technology at MIT is obvious, and everybody talking about. Data is another important strength from MIT. The recent setup, Schwarzman Cognitive Computing, tried to synthesize all this data-related machine learning, artificial intelligence, computer science in this area. But here we really want to also emphasize the value part of the MIT contribution here. If you look at the specific components here, right? I would argue MIT is unique in the sense that we can speak to each of the component with a specific faculty and research lab, right? The close second may be the University of California system combined that can have this level of richness and comprehensiveness to address transportation problems. There are three ways MIT can contribute. The first one is solving short-term technical problems. That's what each of the faculty and the labs have been doing. The second one is developed long-term platform and capacities. And the last one, maybe the most important one, MIT can catalyze the strategic and the institutional change to really solve problems in a fundamental way. For that, I want to mention there's a different allocation of risk in the society, right? The public sector has the listed risk tolerance. Their priority is stability. Industry, depending on which sector, is moderate. It have a different various degrees of tolerance. Academia should have the highest understanding and tolerance of risk. In a way, the professors are paid to fail so that others do not need to. Here, our vision of a mobility initiative is not about changing MIT internally, but more of impacting the world outside. Our goal by 2050 is to decarbonize the world mobility system. So it's a 30-year effort to effect fundamental changes in the long-term trajectory of sustainable mobility development to make it safe, clean, and accessible. There are particular ways to do that. I put them into two categories. The first category is including the introduce concrete technology like automation, 5G, V2X, sensing, electrification, or in transportation, because of the system nature, we want also contribute to the design and implementation of a better system integration. For example, the multimodal system design. The second category is to set up a standard and impact policies. For example, on the cybersecurity, V2X, on the Center of Trust for Mobility System Exchange, or on the coherent framework of the policies on autonomous vehicle deployment. And the last one is MIT is very conscious about doing experiment on the ground and scaled it up in partnership with the industry and the government. We have about 60 faculties participating in this mobility initiative. We have a strong support from MIT leadership, and Annie and I have been the executive team. So for now, let me give you a few examples to illustrate why mobility initiative can do beyond individual faculty capacity. Here, the first example is about the future of work, workplace, and the cities. What is a job? I think these days, the definition of job is quickly evolving. There are forces like information technology, e-commerce, and last is COVID as a social experiment are really changing the nature of work. And it's a relationship with people, organization, and space. So we try to study this in a systematic way to address how the future of work, workplace, and cities impact the technological, relational, institutional, and physical aspects, and how transportation play a role in this. We use the example to illustrate that we see transportation much more than a narrowly defined specific engineering problem, instead as a component of the broader urban and societal system there. And the future of work and workplace clearly have a very direct impact on the urban mobility. The second example is after the COVID relief bill, the next big agenda of Biden administration will be the infrastructure bill. There will be trillions of dollars level, once of every few decades opportunity to upgrade Americans' infrastructure. And for that, we are setting up a set of task forces to guide this infrastructure bill. A few examples including the task forces on electric vehicle charging network, on the multimodal mobility system, on how to upgrade our roads and bridges, the 5G deployment, and mobility data, etc. This is part of the civic engagement function of the mobility initiative. And lastly, I want to mention, talk a little bit from the industry perspective. We just mentioned that mobility is not a winner-take-all market. Therefore, success needs an ecosystem solution. we designed 5 executive roundtables. The idea of the roundtable is to bring us different sectors of companies around a particular theme, and also bring the NGOs and the government department relative to the topic, so that this group of experts can really discuss and debate about what's the critical component in each of these domains. Give some examples: mobility and V2X, the V2 vehicle to infrastructure, to everything communication here. So we're going to bring the hardware producers, the 5G service providers, the car makers, and the infrastructure companies together to really discuss, to fulfill this goal of this intelligent transportation system, how these different sectors should play together, and how Department of Transportation and Department of Energy from the federal state government should play a role in this setting. So MIT tried to, through the mobility, try to gather these people to build up this ecosystem solution here. And other examples include mobility system, mobility and data, mobility and AV policy, autonomous vehicle policy, mobility electrification, mobility and public transit. Lastly, I just mentioned that the mobility initiative has 4 different pillars: research, education, entrepreneurship, and public health, public service. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zhenhua. Our first question is looking at the transportation system more generally. We have a question about how COVID has affected transportation and public transportation specifically. Can you talk a little bit about the trends that you've seen in a post-pandemic world, or in a, I guess, currently pandemic world?
Sure, yeah. I think just intuitively, we know that the impact on transportation and public transportation is significant. But let me give you some details here. Public transit play 2 distinct roles. The first one is to support urban vibrancy. If we want to have a high density urban core, we have to have a public transit to support it, right? The second role is an equity argument. Public transportation provide the baseline mobility service to a very large group of people of low income and minority and a group of people. These 2 functions, they overlap with each other quite a bit in the typical case. But COVID dramatized this distinction in the sense that the first group of people very much disappeared, right? During the most difficult time of COVID, who are still using public transit are the ones who do not have other alternatives, right? So that's very important to recognition that COVID impact people in a very different way, depending on your mobility and accessibility capacity here, right? So therefore, when we talk about recovery and the focus of the improvement, these 2 are also very different, right? I'm really glad that in the recently passed COVID relief bill, there's a specific item, $30 billion targeted at helping the public transportation agency, right? I'm glad to see that last year, many of the public transport agencies are suffering, right? In a very concrete with the financially, they're cutting service, many things, but hopefully this bill will really boost the confidence and improve the situation.
Wonderful, thank you. We have a question here about 5G. You highlighted the task force there that's going to be around 5G, and the attendee here is wondering what the role of 5G is in transport. What is the relationship between the 2?
Right. So here, let me maybe speak 2 points. One is in this V2X discussion, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure communication discussion, right? Into the V2X, you can use different technology to enable it, right? DSRI is one of the technology being discussed quite a bit, but 5G is another very high potential technology to connect the vehicle to infrastructure, right? They have a large set of applications. Actually, as one of the roundtable we're designing, things like emergency management, things like the traffic management, things like more sophisticated congestion pricing, V2X technology can all play a role in this, and 5G could be the technology behind this implementation, right? The second point I want to add is transportation is not an isolated system. Transportation is to enable people to access other systems, for example, public health, entertainment, jobs, restaurant, all these things, right? Using 5G has another important advantage, which is to bring the mobility system and, for example, the smart city system together using the same underlying technology there, right? So for that, in many of the Chinese cities, they're already experimenting. 5G is being quite widely utilized these days. So then you can connect your vehicle with your house, with your building, with your workplaces.
Wonderful, thank you. And as in the first session, we have a question here about the education pillar. Do you mind expanding a little bit on what exactly the education portion of the initiative is and what role education plays more generally for in transportation at MIT?
Sure, yeah. First of all, the mobility initiative, in contrast to the other initiative at MIT, like energy initiative or environment initiative, etc., we have a specific education component, right? We own 2 degrees, Master of Science in Transportation and interdepartmental PhD in Transportation. These 2 degrees have been running for decades, actually trained generations of transportation professionals that are the backbone of the US and many of the international transportation system, right? So we are continuing on this immense legacy there, right? But we're also upgrading these degrees, this curriculum. We're upgrading them in 2 different aspects. The first one is the purpose aspects. As I mentioned, it's no longer a simple question or not simple, but a specific question on solving traffic congestion problem, but it's also a sustainability problem, public health problem, and social justice problem. So in our educational design, we are broadening the goals or objectives of transportation in our conversation and education with the student. That's the first aspect. The second one is over the decades, the technology are also quickly evolving, right? Both in terms of the hardware technology, but also in terms of the software, in terms of the telecommunication and also analytics computation, right? So now we are bringing these new technologies into the new curriculums. So from the analytical point of view, we have the econometrics models, engineering models, operation models, but we're also bringing the latest machine learning, like deep neural networks, etc., into the new curriculum design.
Wonderful. We have a couple more questions about technology, but before, and thank you everybody for the great questions. It's great to have everybody here today. Sorry, we won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll try to get to as many as possible. Before we jump back to the technology, maybe we could stick with the pillars. We have another question here about the entrepreneurship aspect of the mobility initiative. Could you talk a little bit about what you envision for entrepreneurship development in mobility?
Yeah, definitely. Even before mobility initiative, MIT have a very robust ecosystem for entrepreneurship in general, right? We have the Trust Center for Entrepreneurship, we have Delta V, 100K, DesignX, a whole set of programs to support this, right? But we didn't have one designated to mobility-related startup endeavors. So starting from last year, Mobility Initiative has been collaborating with Trust Center for Entrepreneurship and also collaborating with DesignX. Right, that's the 2 programs that are on this. We actually did several specific things. The first one is we designed and implemented a new class called Mobility Venture. The class brings the mobility system concept and the business management and entrepreneurship concept are integrated into one class, right? Aim to bring the MIT student on up to speed of understanding what's the latest challenges of mobility, but also bringing the basic trainings on management and business and also the startup spirit, right? So we just tried it this last fall and we'll continue to run this class into the future years. But the class is just step 1 of the whole process. So after that, we're actually having 2 support. The first one is we're setting up a mobility venture prize that will be open to all MIT members. Is similar to the nature of the 100K, but specific target mobility related startups, right? So we're branding the MIT startups ideas along with the industry players, right? Either you are car makers or service providers or infrastructure company or a mobility-oriented investors will bring these industry players into MIT, interact with the MIT student, staff, and faculty startup, right? So that's the second thing. But then we don't want to recreate the wheel here. Given MIT has such a robust ecosystem, the second thing we want to do is basically guide the student and people interested in startup or mobility into the broader ecosystem of entrepreneurship at MIT.
Wonderful. And I'm going to take moderator's privilege here to ask a question of, since there are so many questions about the setup of the initiative, how alums can get involved in the mobility initiative if they do want to get involved.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I'm glad that we asked this. There's so many ways, right? Maybe I'll start from the entrepreneurship one, right? There are several things. For example, last year we invited a series of founders and CEOs come back to MIT, share their experience with the student, right? Our MIT alum would be great. These type of speakers coming to MIT, share with us your experience. You can play a role of a speaker, a panelist, or you can play a role of mentor, right? Here's a bunch of young kind of kids developing this new idea, and you have 20 years experience in this industry, share with them, mentoring them. That's clearly one aspect of doing this, right? The second one, on the educational side, there are two different ways I think alums can help. One is share with us your experience. Which part of your MIT education really helped in your practice, and which didn't, right? Guide us on through your own experience and inform in the next wave of the curriculum design, what do you see as the major challenges of transportation and how do you see as the solution, right? So that's another possible aspect of it. Lastly, maybe also I'll mention on the public service aspect of it, right? So if our alums play a role in certain foundations, NGOs, or government sectors, if you see any of the MIT Mobility Initiative exercise is relevant, please reach out to us. I'm very happy to share with you what Mobility Initiative is about and hopefully connect it to some of the agendas either at say municipal government, state government, or federal government, or particular NGOs and foundations. So we're very much glad to have this exchange and hopefully contribute to your discussion as well.
Wonderful. And I might add that we actually have a Friday forum as well that takes place every Friday from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern time that we open up to the public, that features an MIT researcher every week doing a deep dive into their research and then having a discussion on that subject. So everybody here is of course welcome to attend. You can either find it on our website or feel free to reach out to me as well. We are at time. I'm just going to launch one more question your way, Jinhua, which is our last question here, which is, do you see a need for government intervention on building an EV charging network? Which is perhaps you can speak a little bit about the task force that we are building on that subject.
Indeed, yeah. Oh, that's great. We're exactly at the moment of setting up a task force on the EV charging station, charging network design, right? For that, there's a clear role that the government, public sector can contribute, right? There are several different things I would talk about. The first one is there is an important initial cost that the public sector need to contribute along with the private sector to do, right? Basic acquisition of the land, setting up these charging units, right? So those things are the initial costs, right? Also upgrading the grid system and make sure the grid system and the charging system are compatible, right? That's one. The second one is standard setting, right? As we mentioned that the whole chain of players in this, from the battery maker to car maker to the charging companies to the infrastructure to the grid, the whole chain need to be connected, right? The standardization needs to be done. Here, there are two different ways. It could be the government setting the standard, but also could be to facilitate the industry alliance and that we can develop the standard on. So for that, MIT can play a facilitating role, bring these people together and have a coherent standard, right? But the next important point I have to mention is if you contrast the EV charging infrastructure with the, say, in the 70s, 80s on the interstate highway system, at that time, the federal government played a basic fundamental role. They put 90% of funding, and the local state topped up to another 10% and implement it, right? For charging station, though, besides the initial investment, charging station, if you look at compared to the gas station, it has to be a sustainable business, right? It has to be run by somebody, I mean, for decades into the future, right? For that, you cannot, I don't think the government can do it by itself. So therefore, a distinct role the government need to play is to cultivate a market structure here, right? Is to enable different players in the market to contribute and make this a sustainable business into the future, right? So these are two distinct roles that the government need to play, right? Maybe I'll just add that for that part, there are a lot to be learned from China or Chinese cities, right? They managed to build a very significant charging infrastructure. Yeah, I mean, clearly not perfect, but much more at scale than the US today. There are a lot of technical and organizational experience that we can learn from that as well.
Wonderful. Well, with that, we're a little over time, and all you MIT alums on the call know that that's a major violation of MIT time. So we will leave you the rest of your evenings. But we thank everybody very much for taking the time to be with us here today. And thank you very much, Professor Zhao, for your insights and your presentation. And we look forward to hearing from you. And let us know if you want to get more involved in the Mobility Initiative. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.